We are back, and you are listening to the Resilient Entrepreneur Podcast number 18. This is Kevin Johnson of Leverage Consulting, and today we're going to talk about how much you love being a manager. And I think some of the managers, leaders that I have worked with in the past, they can find being a manager very frustrating and one of the toughest things they've done, but there are some who also find it very rewarding. I know I've found it very rewarding in the past. But today's podcast was sparked by a call that I just finished with two managers that I've been working with for the past year, and they help manage a multi-million-dollar business. It's a multi-office oral surgery practice, and they do a great job. And some of the things that they work around, are probably some of the very things that you work through and work around. And it just made me think about some of the things that I work with some of these office managers, some of these administrators, people who, and really, some of you listening to this may think, well, maybe this doesn't apply to me. And quite honestly, it doesn't matter if you own the business, you manage the business, even if you are, and when I say this, you could be on the front lines. And when I say even if, sometimes those frontline jobs are literally some of the most important because you're the ones that make everything happen on a day-to-day basis. And you're the ones that are working with the customers, the clients, and so on. So as I'm talking about this is literally something that should apply to everyone. Now, it may really hit home for people who are a manager on a day-to-day basis, and it may carry different titles, but it may still boil down to being a manager. And as I mentioned a little while ago, some are more in a managerial role and some are a little bit more in that leadership role. And sometimes the difference in those two is how you choose to take this approach. And some of what our conversation centered around today was cell phone use in the office. And it really doesn't matter what the actual issue is. Sometimes it's more about how we deal with it. So I could exchange the issue of cell phone use in the office. And when I say cell phone use, it could be cell phones, it could be smartwatches. It's something. It's some type of electronic distraction. I'm old enough. I still feel young, but I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have cell phones. I remember there was a time when some places barely even had a computer in their office. So having all these distractions, in some respects, if you're old enough to remember some of this stuff, we didn't have a lot of this problem 10, 15 years ago. So, like I said, we could replace the issue of cell phones with with arriving late to work or attendance or teamwork issues. I mean, I can go right on down the road with different examples. But you have to remember, what is the whole point of a manager or an administrator, a leader? The idea is that we have objectives and we have a team. And as a manager, I'm using and utilizing my objectives, and I'm tapping into and harnessing my team and their efforts to help achieve those objectives. So even if we don't have objectives, well, that's a great place to start, because first you need to know what those objectives are. Secondly, your team needs to know what those objectives are. And when I then think about, being a manager and leader, we have to think, and I think sometimes this frustration comes from, I've worked with some really awesome people in my lifetime, and some of the really, really smart people I've come to know and really appreciate over the years sometimes get frustrated because they know what needs to happen. They understand what needs to change. And this is why I love having this example of the cell phones, because it's so simple and so complex at the same time. With cell phones, it's simple in the sense that you're being paid X amount of dollars per hour or per week to do a job if you're a team member. And then we have these electronic gadgets, devices that are on us, around us on a regular basis. And you can't tell me that these things don't pull you away from work. And, if you look at it from a leader-manager standpoint, I can say that If my employees or my team members are on their cell phones on a regular basis, they're distracted from their job. And when people complain and say, I can't get my job done, yet they have time to constantly look at their phone or their smartwatch, they run into errors and problems because they weren't paying attention. Even if you go to old school time management courses, take one task, do it without distraction, and move on to the next thing. It's like if you have one piece of paper, grab that one piece of paper, deal with whatever's on it, and finish it, throw it in the trash, move on to the next thing. That is 9 times out of 10 the most efficient thing to do. So when we're constantly having these interruptions with Facebook updates, Instagram updates, text messages, voicemails, I can go on. How many different notifications can you get that will come through your phone or smartwatch? You answer that one. So those are all distractions. Those are all things that tend to pull us away from what we normally need to do. And then some who are actually wearing the watch or the smartphone, they're doing some pretty serious stuff throughout the course of the day. And it could be anything from we are managing a patient who is in our practice to it could be a real estate agent who's writing a contract for their customer or their client. It could be, somebody working in a hair salon, you're a stylist working in a hair salon, we get distracted and then whoop, we left product in somebody's hair too long and now we've burnt their hair. I mean, it could be any number of things. We could burn the pizza. But in all of this kind of centers around making that change in the office because it is super simple. Put the cell phones and the smartwatches in your locker, wherever, leave them in your car. There are no distractions. It's that simple. However, getting the team to see this is where the issue may come into play. So this is where we need to look at again, our objective and our vision. And I think, for those of you who don't already have this quote unquote policy, which I really actually dislike the word policy, but behind the curtains, if we have this policy that there are no cell phones, there are no smartwatches when we're working with customers, clients, patients, then the easiest way to go about doing this is we just don't allow people to bring them in period. When you are brought on and someone's a new hire, that is by far the easiest place to say we don't allow it during patient hours. It's left in the lunchroom. And if that's not something that somebody can live with, then I guess they don't choose to work here. Making the change is the one where sometimes we have the difficulty with people who've become accustomed to this is okay. So then we need to get into managerial ammunition. And I mentioned some of this a little while ago, but I look at managerial ammunition as the thing that you start loading up your belt with. You start loading up with all these things that are going to be your way of impressing upon people our need to change. So, if you find someone, and this is, again, these are just examples, and this is all centered around the cell phone thing. If I find somebody, when I've already explained that we don't use cell phones while we're seeing patients, if I find them, so that means you got to get out. You need to be about. We need to see it with our own eyeballs. It's not perception anymore. I see it with my own eyeballs. Now that's part of my ammunition. If I go to a supply closet and I find that someone is not rotating the inventory. So, for example, a client of mine not long ago, they went through and one of their team members was really distracted and they're putting new drugs in front of the old drugs, which means we're going to constantly use the new stuff. And at some point, we're going to have expired drugs in our office. And hopefully somebody finds that, which they did, to their credit. So they ended up rotating everything and they were able to use it. But in the end, once that office would have found we now have expired drugs, they would have had to sweep all that stuff in the trash, all because somebody was distracted and wasn't paying attention. And for them, it could have been the cost of hundreds or thousands of dollars. So that really gets down to being aware enough of what we're doing, not distracted, so we can focus on our actual job. And this was just inventory, if you will. But it would have made us lose thousands of dollars. There's a time efficiency sense of things. So if people aren't able to get enough of their job done, then really looking into how much they're really focusing on what they're supposed to be doing. And again, like it's not, oftentimes it's not that hard when you see somebody, they got the outline of the cell phone in their pocket, or they can't have a conversation for more than 5 minutes without looking at their watch 3 or 4 or 5 times. They've been distracted every time. So when I get to the managerial ammunition, the whole idea of this is you're going to get out in front of the chaos. So this thing isn't really about the cell phone issue, which I'm sure some of you will appreciate this message, some maybe not so much. But the idea of this is to take this managerial ammunition and load your belt up. It's really like, I got to get examples. I have to have things that are compelling. Because if the owner knows and realizes that we're wasting money because people aren't paying attention, or we're potentially putting our customers, patients at risk, whether it's a real estate contract or patient care, whatever. Any of these things could be putting our customers, patients, clients at risk. If they see some of this stuff, then I can potentially influence my owner, my leader, because now they know that we got a problem. And they can now see how this issue is causing a problem that is near and dear to their heart. But using these examples are ones where sometimes, and I really do believe some people just do not realize how much or how far off the mark they may be. And that's where managers come into play. This is why we need managers, because managers, in a sense, they're the guardrails for our business. They're the ones that keep everybody in the middle of the road and headed in the same direction. And by you loading up your belt with this managerial ammunition, you're able to get out in front of the chaos and become more of a leader. If you don't do this, you're constantly going to be a firefighter. And that's a place where I believe most people get frustrated, is they're constantly in firefighter mode. And by getting out in front of the chaos with examples and you leading the group, the team, then you're going to get yourself into a position of being more of a leader. And leaders influence the direction of where we're going. Firefighters are just there to put out the smoke and the flames. So that is just one podcast. I will likely have some other ones coming up soon regarding being a manager. It's one idea I work with, coach, and consult with a lot of managers and leaders on the direction of their business and their practice. And this is just one of the things that I work on. This is just the tip of the iceberg, one of the thousands of things that can be frustrating but also rewarding. So if this really was impactful, this was something you really like, feel free to share it with some friends. If there are certain things that you would want me to talk about, let me know. Love to hear it. Other than that, that was your Resilient Entrepreneur Podcast number 18. I look forward to hearing some of your great comments and some of your great feedback like I've been hearing.